I met my wife, Debbie, in 2019. And this was a pivotal moment for me because I'd been studying the wisdom teachings of the East for years at that point, and she'd been studying the psychology teachings of the West for years at that point. She's from India, so there was this weird crossover. I grew up in the West studying the teachings of the East. She grew up in the East studying the teachings of the West. And so immediately we knew that we had to compare notes. In fact, on our first date, our second date, that was pretty much what we spent our time doing. And then we went deeper and deeper on that as our relationship grew. We knew that we wanted to meet up and have a conversation regardless of whether there was any romantic connection. So we were just a really strong match from the beginning across many different levels. I had been looking to cross-reference what I had learned studying mindfulness, studying the Buddha Dharma. And I had done so pretty well within what is called the Dharma, within teachings of Buddhism. And other wisdom teachings too, Advaita Vedanta from Hinduism, a little Taoism. I was mainly interested in those teachings which are called non-dual. And I'd had a lot of fun cross-referencing my understandings. Well, when I got the chance to speak to a psychologist, someone who had studied all of this stuff from the academic angle, with all of the data that comes from scientific measurement. And when I say this stuff, I mean the basic study of how to be well. The study of how humans fuck themselves up. And everything in between. The quest for well-being and how it's been interpreted by different cultures is super important to look at. When Alan Watts, an Englishman, went to Japan to study Zen, he brought it back and started teaching it to Westerners. He said not because he was trying to convert them, but because many of them had never heard another option. So they believed in Christianity, but they'd never tested that belief against anything else. So he said, I want to give you another option. And then if you say, yeah, Christianity is my flavor, you've tested it against something from a completely different place, completely different way of thinking. Now you've got a reference point. Well, I wanted many reference points, and that's why I studied this stuff so hard. And when I met Debbie, I had not studied psychology at all. And we were both pleased when we found we agreed on pretty much everything. But I'll tell you, one of the major learnings that I got from Debbie was where to draw the line on what the role of a wisdom teacher is, what the role of a mindfulness teacher, what the role of a Dharma teacher is. We see and hear about miraculous transformations through the study of meditation and mindfulness. I experienced many of those transformations in my own life. I'd begun experiencing them in students I was working with. But I was always hesitant to package it as a one-size-fits-all miracle remedy for everyone. I just didn't feel comfortable doing that, and it was when I met Debbie that I found out why. Of course, I knew that there was such a thing as disorder. I knew that there was such a thing as a damaged brain. I hadn't really put a finger on that as what I needed to be careful around, but it was obvious when Debbie and I started talking, oh, there are people who are in no position to take responsibility for themselves. There are people who are completely at the mercy of an addiction, for example. And those people need intervention. They need someone else to drag them out of the pit that they're in. And then, of course, as and when appropriate, we want to be empowering that individual to take up practices that will help them to help themselves. But there is a time and a place for that. And as Debbie and I spoke about this more and more, I came to understand, hey, here's the most powerful way to say it. The most profound spiritual instruction I ever heard is rest naturally without seeking or describing anything. Rest naturally without seeking or describing anything. This is the whole of the Dharma, the whole of the wisdom teachings of the East, in one simple sentence. Now, everyone, when they hear that sentence, has a degree of either acceptance or objection to it. If you are someone who is able to rest naturally without seeking or describing anything in all circumstances, then congratulations, you don't need to do anything. You're cool as a cucumber, you're good to go. But most people will find that there's some circumstance in their life that they're unable to chill. They're unable to be okay with what's going on. And so that's where I will begin my work with someone who comes to me for guidance. But imagine if I were to give that instruction to a heroin addict. I've known heroin addicts. I've known people who have been so deep in addiction that it's almost as if they're possessed. The pain of not using for those people was so great that they pretty much end up in the position that they'd rather die than not take another dose. So what's going to happen if I say to that person, rest naturally without seeking or describing anything? They're going to go and score. They're going to go and score. They're just going to keep using. So that would be bad advice to that person. That person instead needs that intervention, needs relative level support, worldly level support. They need to go into rehab, essentially. And then after they've had their withdrawal symptoms, after they've dealt with what they need to deal with, once they've got some degree of mental balance, then maybe we start to talk about a mindfulness practice. And it's not going to be a non-dual mindfulness practice. I mean, maybe the rare few would be in a position to hear it. Sometimes when people are desperate, they hear one teaching and bam, they snap out of their delusions. Most of the time, someone in that position is going to need a more deliberate practice, like a formal sitting meditation, a breath-focused meditation, because the sensations that they're dealing with moment to moment, meaning mental sensations, physical sensations, thoughts, feelings, memories, everything that their experience is made up of, is so painful that what they actually need is distraction. And so the best we can do for them is give them a wholesome distraction, as opposed to the unwholesome, damaging, harmful distractions that they've been using up until now. So the teacher has to be careful. And indeed, there is also the case where an individual is suffering with mental disorder, where there is some kind of diagnosable, measurable condition that means that their mental functioning is impaired. So we're not talking about just overthinking or everyday anxiety here, friends. We're talking about chronic conditions, or we're talking about physical changes to the structure of the brain that make it very difficult for that person to make good decisions, for example, to exercise willpower. Some would say we just need to be hard on these individuals. My wife's work shows some of these individuals are just so far gone that they need that clinical intervention. And so as we continued these conversations, it made it very clear to me where the line was in my work and where it would be wise for me to recommend to someone that they see a doctor, a therapist. And depending on where they're at, it might be that the recommendation is, excuse me, a combination of wisdom practice and intervention. I've never actually had someone come to me yet who is so far gone that they're not in a position to practice mindfulness. But this is, as you can hear, a really important issue. You can likely get a sense of how much damage someone in my position might do if they were to say to someone who is clearly suffering with some kind of disorder, you just need to meditate. Ditch your therapist and just focus on your breath for 12 hours a day. And this is not to say that that could never work. We do hear of these miraculous transformations by means of mindfulness and meditation, but it's always about what's the wise move for most individuals who are in a given situation. I'm always going to assess anyone that I see on an initial call. I'm going to ask them questions and see where they're at. And if I have any doubt that they are able to make wise decisions for themselves, that they're able to take care of their basic needs, or if I think they're in any danger of harming themselves, I'm always going to refer them to a professional. I am not trained to deal with disorder. I don't know how it works, not really. I hear bits and pieces from Debbie, but she's trained on this stuff for years and years and years. She knows exactly how that person with personality disorder is going to be impaired in their decision making, for example, and she will then create a course of therapy around that person's limitations. This is not my wheelhouse. It's not what I've trained for. I've trained in the mechanics of mind such that in a healthy mind, we can go to work. That's my wheelhouse. That's my area. And so it was very comfortable for me then, after having these conversations with Debbie, to say, oh, I know where the line is now. Now I feel safe shouldering that responsibility, which is still great. You know, the conversations I have with people are on the very, very deepest level. We talk about trauma. We talk about overthinking, anxiety, all of that stuff. Some students of mine are in therapy alongside what we do together. And so we really get into it as a means of learning to accept it and learning to let it go. That's my role. Acceptance of whatever is arising, however long it takes, and then the letting go. The dissolving of everything which ails us mentally, emotionally. And so, friend, I hope this has been useful to you as an exploration of where that line is between wisdom practice and teaching and what we call psychology and therapy. Lots of overlap, lots and lots of overlap. But this certainly was significant knowledge to me. And so I hope that it's served you. Perhaps you're someone who's choosing whether therapy or spiritual practice might be the right pick for you. It may very well be that some combination of the two is the correct move. And you'd be in a strong position there with a 1-2 punch from the wisdom teacher whose focus is you supporting yourself and the therapist there who may well talk about that, but who also has the qualification to give you treatment, to treat a condition and to deal with whatever symptoms of disorder you might be experiencing, mild or severe. I wish you well, friend, in your journey of healing, in your journey of self-discovery, and I'll see you real soon.